If you have been programming, you've probably heard of the term object-oriented programming, which is basically a set of principles for creating reusable components. We have the same concept in CSS, so we can structure our styles and make them reusable. If we can reuse our styles, then we don't have to repeat them over and over. So we'll end up with a smaller, more maintainable style sheet. So object-oriented CSS is based on two very simple principles, which you're going to master in just a few minutes. The first principle says separate container from content. So let's start off by adding a header with the class of hero. And inside this header, we want to add a button with the class of btn. We can say sign up. Now let's define some styles for the button. So here we can say we have a hero, and inside the hero, we have a button with these styles. I'm going to set the background to gold, border to 0, to get rid of the default ugly border that all browsers apply. Then we're going to give it a border radius of 30 pixels. So we have nice round corners. We need to give some padding. Let's say 1 rem for vertical and 2 rems for horizontal padding. And finally, we set the font family to the system font stack. Okay. So we get this beautiful gold button in the hero section, which is also called the banner. Now, what if you want to have the same kind of button in another section, like a sidebar? Back to our markup, we can represent a sidebar using the side element. So we give it a class like side-bar. Now, inside this sidebar, we want to add a button with the class of btn. And the label can be contact. Now look, this new button doesn't have those styles. So back to our style sheet, here's one way to solve this problem. We can select all this code, duplicate it, and then change the parent element from hero to sidebar. Obviously, this solves the problem. But as I told you before, duplication is bad. We want to keep our code dry. So this is where the first principle of object-oriented CSS comes to the rescue. Separate container from content. In this example, the button is the content, and the hero or the sidebar is the container. We want to separate the content from the container. So I'm going to get rid of this hero. Now we have a button component with these styles. With this, we no longer need all these extra styles. So we can have a button with this class, and this button always looks the same no matter where we place it. Whether we place it in the hero section or a sidebar or the footer, it always looks the same. So that was the first principle. The second principle says separate structure from skin. To explain this principle, let's say we want to make the button in the sidebar blue. So it's going to have the same size and padding as the other button, but it's going to have a different background color. So back to our markup, here's the button in the sidebar. We can change the class to something like button-blue. Now, back to our style sheet, we can grab all these styles, duplicate them, and of course, we know this is a terrible thing to do, but bear with me for a moment. So we're going to change the class to button-blue, and here we set the background to Dodger blue. So the problem is solved, but we ended up with duplication again. This is where the second principle comes to the rescue. So in this example, our button has some structure, which is defined by these properties, and it also has some skin, some shell. The skin can be blue or yellow. The second principle says we should separate the skin from the structure. So we want to have a button class that purely defines the structure without the background color. Then we define a second class, let's call it btn gold, for defining a skin. This is where we use the background color. Now it's better to change the name of this class to btn-primary. So if in the future we decide to change this background color to something else, we don't have to come back here and rename that class as well. So we use an abstract name for this class, okay? Now similarly, we're going to have another class for defining another skin, which we can call btn-secondary. And this is where we use the blue background. And of course, we don't need these other properties that define a structure. Okay, so now we have absolutely no duplication in our code. We define the structure here with two separate skins. Now back to our markup. For our first button, we're going to give it a second class, that is btn-primary. And for the second button, we're going to have two classes, btn and btn-secondary. Now we have two buttons with different colors, and we have zero duplication in our code. This is the result of applying object-oriented principles.